آج روئے زمین پر جماعت احمدیہ کے علاوہ کوئی جماعت نہیں جو بحیثیت جماعت ایشیا میں بھی جانی جاتی ہے اور یورپ میں بھی، افریقہ میں بھی جانی جاتی ہے اور امریکہ میں بھی، آسٹریلیا میں بھی جانی جاتی ہے اور جزائر میں بھی، اور یہی ایک جماعت ہے جس کے خلاف باقی 72 فرقوں کے فتوے موجود ہیں۔ ہم مسلمان ہیں ہر اس تعریف کے مطابق جو حضرت صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم نے ایک مسلمان کی ہے، اور جس کی روح سے کسی مسلمان پر خود کفر کا فتویٰ لگانے والا جو ہے خود اپنے آپ کو اسلام سے محروم کر لیتا ہے۔ ہم مسلمان ہیں خدا تعالیٰ کے فیصلے کے مطابق، جس نے ہمارا نام مسلمان رکھا ہے، جس نے وآخرین منہم لما یہلکوا بہم کا اعلان فرما کر ہمیں ان حقیقی مسلمانوں میں شامل فرما دیا جن کی ابتدا بھی اسلام ہے اور جن کی انتہا بھی اسلام ہے۔ آپ علیہ السلام فرماتے ہیں کہ ابتدا سے میرا یہی مذہب ہے، میرے دعوے کے انکار کی وجہ سے کوئی شخص کافر یا دجال نہیں ہو سکتا، میرے دعوے کے انکار کی وجہ سے کوئی شخص کافر یا دجال نہیں ہو سکتا، ہاں ضال اور زیادہ ثواب سے منحرف ضرور ہوگا، اور میں اس کا نام بے ایمان نہیں رکھتا، ہاں میں ایسے سب لوگوں کو ضال اور زیادہ حیثیت کو ثواب سے دور سمجھتا ہوں جو ان سچائیوں سے انکار کرتے ہیں جو خدا تعالیٰ نے میرے پر کھولی ہیں۔ میں بلا شبہ ایسے ہر ایک آدمی کو ضلالت کی آلودگی سے مبتلا سمجھتا ہوں جو حق اور راستی سے منحرف ہے، لیکن میں کسی کلمہ گو کا نام کافر نہیں رکھتا جب تک وہ میری تکفیر اور تکذیب کر کے اپنے تئیں خود کافر نہ بنا لے گئے۔ سو اس معاملے میں ہمیشہ سے سبقت میرے مخالفوں کی طرف سے ہے کہ انہوں نے مجھ کو کافر کہا، میرے لیے فتویٰ تیار کیا، میں نے سبقت کر کے ان کے لیے کوئی فتویٰ تیار نہیں کیا، اور اس بات کا وہ خود اقرار کر سکتے ہیں کہ اگر میں اللہ تعالیٰ کے نزدیک مسلمان ہوں تو مجھ کو کافر بنانے سے رسول اللہ صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم کا فتویٰ ان پر یہی ہے کہ وہ خود کافر ہیں، جیسا کہ حدیث میں سنا۔ سو میں ان کو کافر نہیں کہتا، بلکہ وہ مجھ کو کافر کہہ کر خود فتویٰ نبوی کے نیچے آتے ہیں، وہ مجھ کو کافر کہہ کر خود فتویٰ نبوی کے نیچے آتے ہیں۔
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the 7th and penultimate episode of the series 1974 From Democracy to Extremism. In the previous episodes we have briefly analysed the content of the proceedings of the National Assembly of Pakistan that were concluded with a decision on 7 September 1974. That date and the decision were pre-planned. Since that day, Ahmadis have been non-Muslims for the purposes of law and constitution in Pakistan. After that decision, one would have expected that entire Ahmadiyya community would have come out on the streets of Pakistan and retaliated by ransacking public property, looting and murdering, at least in the fashion similar to what was being done to the Ahmadis since May 1974. But no, that did not happen. Let us see why.
Hadhrat Khalifatul Masih III advised the Jamaat in his very first sermon after the Second Amendment of 1974.
And Ahmadi's reaction to the amendment of 7 September should not be such that the world can perceive an iota of aggression in that. That would not happen. Any act which can cause violence or assist in seizing people's rights will never be committed by Ahmadis.
Huzur said,
I say to the Jamaat that in the eyes of Allah your response should neither be that of an aggressor nor of a perpetrator. Jamaat-e-Ahmadiyya must not display any reaction which has a speck of aggression in that.
In that Friday sermon, Hadhrat Khalifatul Masih III further said,
As far as this question is concerned, that who is Muslim and who is not, I have been stating this from the very outset and have been saying this long before this amendment, that if someone has bought his faith from a shop at Lahore's Mall Road, then his faith would be wasted. But you and I, who Allah has declared Muslims, have nothing to fear. Let the world declare whatever they may, you have nothing to worry about.
It was the result of Huzur's prayers and guidance that in the face of such injustice and barbarism, Ahmadis remained peaceful, holding fast to prayer and patience.
This was a response by the head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, who had triumphantly himself gone through the most grilling inquisition before that very parliament that betrayed the trust of not only every decent Pakistani, but the religion of Islam itself. Today we'll start discussing the far-reaching implications of that amendment in the Constitution. Again, we have the company of Advocate of Supreme Court of Pakistan, Mr. Mujibur Rahman, with us. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Mr. Rahman, my first question is going to be with regards to the words of the Khalif of the time. How was the impact of that in terms of pacifying the emotions of Ahmadis in that difficult time?
Farooq, every time that the Ahmadiyya community has gone through any kind of trials and tribulations, the reaction of the Ahmadis have always amazed the world outside. Ahmadis have proved to be, and they in fact are, a different stuff altogether. On every occasion we find that they did not react like the ordinary citizens in the Asian countries or in any country, because they do not act impulsively like indisciplined, rowdy crowds. The Jamaat has been disciplined over a period of time, and the word of the Khalifatul Masih is a balm on the wounds of this community. I remember I was involved in that kind of things, and the commissioner of Rawalpindi had me rang up by some of his subordinates. He said, "Mujib Saab, what is your reaction?" And I knew the reaction because we had heard the sermon of the Hadhrat Khalifatul Masih, and we knew the temperament of the Jamaat. I said, "We do not need any certificate for our being Muslims for any worldly authority. If I am a Muslim in the eyes of my Lord, I am happy with that, whatever your constitution says." So that was the attitude the entire community took. The constitution may say anything. My relationship with my God remains intact. I am not going to allow it to be broken. So that is how the Ahmadis reacted, calmly, quietly, supplicating to their God, even with a greater devotion, even with a greater sincerity, because they thought, now our only hope is our God above, our Lord above. These things did not matter. That was the reaction, amazing reaction. And the people were stunned on that reaction. What is this? We have done so much. In fact, the government had made preparations to deal with a rowdy reaction, but nothing.
That never happened.
That never happened.
Mr. Rahman, from a legal perspective, this amendment in the Constitution, how has it affected the Ahmadis, or going back in history after 74, how were Ahmadis affected by that constitutional amendment?
Mahmud, if you look at it from the legal perspective, the amendment was legally flawed in more than one ways. It did not make any sense. But looking at the words of the Constitution in so many words, the amendment of the Constitution in so many words did not prohibit Ahmadis from professing to be Muslims. It said they shall not be Muslims for the purposes of law and constitution. It did not say how they should behave. So Ahmadis continued to believe themselves to be Muslims, continued to practice as Muslims, continued to lead their lives in order. There was not the slightest change. If there was any change, it was a greater devotion to God. No change. Prayers continued, azan continued, their fasting continued. They continued like Muslims because the law did not stop them. And if the law had stopped them from practicing, the things might have been more difficult, and the reaction might have might have been different. When we go to the later periods, we know when the bans are placed on the practices, then Ahmadis have shown some reaction that practices we are not going to give up.
The amendment itself never made any difference.
Amendments have never did.
As Ahmadis.
That came later.
Okay. Well, Prime Minister Bhutto and King Faisal were the masterminds behind the draconian law, but did they succeed to achieve what they had envisaged for themselves?
King Faisal of the House of Saud ascended to the Saudi throne in 1964 after forcing his older brothers to step down as the king. Faisal's formative years were spent in consolidating control over the Arabian Peninsula for his family. He was a pan-Islamist from his youth and wished to bring back the institution of Khalifa back into the Muslim world. The House of Saud saw themselves as the rightful leaders of the Muslim world, and after becoming the king, Faisal used the political turmoil in the Middle East to his advantage. He used religious edicts from his Grand Mufti to unite Muslims in the Arab struggles against the State of Israel. He was instrumental in setting up and funding the OIC and the Muslim World League. His aspirations were to be realized through these organizations. The Muslim World League, under the instructions and funding from King Faisal, attracted the religious fundamentalist elements from all around the Muslim world. It was this organization which issued a decree for social and economic boycott of Ahmadis in 1974. King Faisal saw Pakistan as an ideal model for future Islamic states and took keen interest in Prime Minister Bhutto's rise to power. It is said that it was him who asked Mr. Bhutto to declare Ahmadis as non-Muslims. He funded the second OIC conference to be held in Lahore, which helped Bhutto immensely in improving his public image as an Islamic leader. His vision of an Islamic caliphate was cut short by his nephew, also called Faisal, who assassinated him on the 25th of March, 1975. Faisal's enduring legacy is the continued promotion of a religiously rigid ideology across the Islamic world and the rise of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Zulfiqar Ali Bhutto was a very intelligent and charismatic leader who rose through the ranks of Pakistani establishment during President Ayyub's dictatorship. Born in an aristocratic family, Bhutto was educated at Harvard and Oxford universities. He founded the Pakistan People's Party in 1967, which won by a heavy majority in West Pakistan, in the first ever national elections held in 1970. The elections resulted in a stalemate between East and West Pakistan, and a civil war ensued, culminating in the creation of Bangladesh. Bhutto was elected Prime Minister of what remained of Pakistan. Being a seasoned politician, he set about rebuilding his image after the loss of half the country. His opponents were already branding him as a communist, and the religious right wing were critical of his Islamic credentials. Bhutto accommodated the religious parties in drafting the 1973 constitution. His secular political agenda was abandoned to appease the mullahs when he excluded any non-Muslims to hold key offices in Pakistan. The mullah's next step was to demand Mr. Bhutto to comply with the aspirations of the Muslim Ummah and act upon the fatwa of the Muslim World League against the Ahmadis. When the Rabwa incident took place, instead of looking for enforcing peace in the country, Bhutto agreed to the mullah's demands and asked the National Assembly to decide on the status of Ahmadi Muslims. Under his instructions, the Assembly then declared Ahmadis as non-Muslims. Bhutto was very keen to take the credit for solving the 90-years-old Qadiani Masla. His close associate, Maulana Kosa Niazi, narrates, Mr. Bhutto felt that the credit which should have gone to his government had not been accorded.
The Maulvis are claiming all credit for the amendment. We must portray the true picture before the people.
Bhutto could not keep the mullahs happy for long. The elections in 1977 brought with them allegations of widespread vote rigging, and the right-wing parties, along with the religious orthodoxy, rose up against him once again. This time their demand was to impose the Nizam-e-Mustafa without further delay. In a last-ditch attempt, Bhutto banned alcohol and gambling, hoping to appease the mullahs once again. But this was not to happen. General Ziaul Haq, the army chief who was handpicked by him, toppled the government in July 1977. Bhutto was then tried and convicted of the murder of Nawab Muhammad Ahmad Qasuri. During his trial, a High Court judge remarked that Bhutto was a Muslim in name only. Bhutto was so deeply hurt by this statement that he devoted a good part of his statement in front of the Supreme Court to protest against such an accusation. He was so distressed by it that he had tears in his eyes when he told the court that no one had any right to call any reciter of Kalima as kafir. He could not help listing his services to Islam, including declaring the Kalima reciting Ahmadis as kafir. He said in the court,
It is an acknowledged principle that the person who recites the kalima is a Muslim, and no one has the right to call him a non-Muslim. Abu Sufyan, a great enemy of the Holy Prophet, may peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was brought to him. He claimed to have recited the kalima, but the Holy Prophet ﷺ's companions argued that he had not done it with sincerity in his heart, and they wanted to kill him. But the Holy Prophet, may peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, said that as he had recited the kalima, he was now a Muslim and could not be harmed.
During his imprisonment, Bhutto wrote a lengthy letter to his daughter. One passage is hauntingly insightful.
Religion is a link between God and man, and man and man. Political ideology is a link between man and man. If an unlearned adventurer in his quest for political power and perpetuation brings religion down from its celestial plane to a mundane level by converting it into a narrow political ideology, the adventurer endangers the link between God and man and man and man.
Bhutto was sentenced to death, and all his appeals to review the decision and clemency were denied. He told his security officer in jail, Colonel Rafi, after he was told of the time of his execution,
"My lawyers have messed up this case. Yahya is responsible for my hanging."
It was the same trusted Yahya Bakhtiyar who cross-examined the Ahmadiyya delegation during the in-camera sessions. His other lawyer was Hafiz Pirzada, his law minister in 1974. Despite numerous pleas for mercy and clemency from the international community, Zulfiqar Ali Bhutto was executed by hanging on the morning of the 4th of April 1979. He was 51 years old at the time of his death.
مسلم علیہ نے یہ نہیں فرمایا کہ جو تاریخ میں سب سے زیادہ نقصان پہنچائے گا، یہ آپ نے فرمایا ہے کہ ایک شدید معاند احمدیت کی جو بہت بڑا دشمن ہو ثابت ہوگا، اس کے متعلق نام نہیں بتایا، لیکن اللہ تعالیٰ نے مجھے خبر دی ہے ایک الہام میں قلب یموت علی قلب، یہ الفاظ ہیں الہام کے. اس کو عربی محاورے کے طور پر دیکھنا چاہیے اور اس رنگ میں دیکھنا چاہیے جس رنگ میں جس پر الہام ہوا ہے اس نے سمجھا اس کو، اور اس نے ایک ایسے رنگ میں سمجھا ہے جس کی طرف عام آدمی کا دماغ جا ہی نہیں سکتا. 52 کا یہاں کوئی لفظ موجود نہیں، کوئی ہے یہاں کوئی اشارہ بھی نہیں. اس سے پتہ چلتا ہے کہ یہ غیر معمولی پیش گوئی ہے. آپ نے فرمایا کہ اللہ تعالیٰ نے میرے دل میں تفہیم ڈالی کہ قلب سے پہلا قلب جو ہے وہ ایک دشمن کے متعلق ہے، اور دوسرے قلب میں اس کی عمر بتائی گئی ہے جس عمر پر وہ مرے گا. یعنی قلب یموت علی قلب میں دوسرا لفظ جو قلب استعمال ہوا ہے یہاں اس کی عمر مراد ہے. چنانچہ میں نے جب اس کے عدد نکالے تو 52 نکلے. قلب کے عدد 52 ہیں جو ہندسوں کے علم کے لحاظ سے. تو آپ نے فرمایا کہ اس زمانے میں لکھ رہے ہیں جبکہ ابھی ایسا کوئی شخص نہ تھا، نہ کوئی ذہن بہم بات تھی. فرمایا کہ اس کے متعلق یہ یقینی بات ہے کہ ایک غیر معمولی طور پر دشمن ظاہر ہوگا جو احمدیت کو نقصان پہنچانے کی کوشش کرے گا، اور وہ 52 سال میں داخل ہونے سے پہلے نہیں مرے گا، اور 52 سال میں جب وہ قدم رکھے گا تو سال گزرنے سے پہلے ضرور مر جائے گا. تب یہ پیشگوئی پوری ہوگی. اب جب بھٹو صاحب کو انہوں نے الٹایا ہے جا صاحب نے، تو اس وقت ان کی عمر 52 سال نہیں تھی. اس وقت ان کی عمر 49 یا 50 سال کے قریب تھی. کتنی دیر رہے ہیں یہ پھر معذور ہونے کے بعد؟ کیا یاد ہے آپ کو؟ 2 سال جی 2 سال. ہاں تو ابھی 85ویں میں تھے یہ آخر پر. اور عجیب بات یہ ہے کہ اسی وقت جماعت کے خلیفۃ المسیح نے تو کسی کو اعلان نہیں کیا تھا اس بارے میں، لیکن اللہ تعالیٰ نے ہر جگہ احمدی کے دل میں یہ خیال ڈال دیا کہ یہ انہی کے متعلق ہے. اور ابھی 2.25 سال رہتے تھے اور پتہ ہی نہیں تھا کہ ہونا کیا ہے. انہوں نے باتیں شروع کر دی. چنانچہ مودودی اخباروں نے یہ اپیلیں شائع کی. سندھ کے اخبار جسارت تھا ایک تھا، مجھے یاد نہیں نام، لیکن اس میں اپیلیں شائع شدہ موجود ہیں حکومت سے کہ تم نے اگر اس کو مارنا ہے تو پہلے ختم کرو. بعضوں نے کہا نہ مارو ورنہ یہ کہیں گے مرزا صاحب سے اچھا نکلے، اس لیے چھوڑ دو. اور بعضوں نے کہا کہ اس سال نہیں مارنا، یہ سال نہ آنے دو. اور شور پڑ گیا. یعنی چھپے ہوئے واقعات موجود ہیں और वही जो अपने आप को सबसे बड़ा दुश्मन अहमदियत बना रहा है आज, उसके हाथों खुदा ने अहमदियत की तस्दीक जाहिर की है। ये बात भूल जाती है दुनिया, मोहर लगा चुका है इस वक्त अपने हाथ से कि अहमदियत सच्ची है। उसी के हाथों फैसला होता है और फैसले में ताख़ीर होती चली गई, यहाँ तक कि 52 साल नहीं आया। और जब 52 आया तो पाकिस्तान की तारीख में सिर्फ एक सियासतदान है जिसकी सालगिरह मनाई गई है और 52वीं मनाई गई है सिर्फ। और बीबीसी ने ऐलान किया कि आज भुट्टो साहब की सालगिरह है और 52वें साल में कदम रख रहे हैं, और उर्दू की खबर में कदम रख रहे हैं, एक लफ्ज़ इस्तेमाल हुए हैं। और पाकिस्तान के अखबारों में ये छपी बात कि अब भुट्टो साहब ने 52 साल में कदम रखा। अब बताइए कि कायदे आज़म का साल नहीं कभी मनाया गया पैदाइश का, और बालियाकत अली ख़ान का साल पैदाइश का नहीं मनाया गया। एक ही सियासतदान है पाकिस्तान की तारीख में जिसकी सालगिरह का ऐलान होता है, तशहीर की जाती है, और किसी और सालगिरह की नहीं। पहले कितनी देर रह चुके हैं वो, 1970 से आए हुए हैं। कभी पीपल पार्टी को ख्याल नहीं है कि सालगिरह मनाए, इतना पॉपुलर लीडर है। जब 52 में दाखिल होता है तो सालगिरह मनाते हैं। इनमें निशानात नहीं है क्या? क्या गैर मामूली खुदा ताला की तकदीर नजर नहीं आ रही, उंगली दिखाती हुई? और वही का फैसला है जिस पर बुनियाद डालकर आज सारे मजालिम किए जा रहे हैं। इसलिए जुल्म का रास्ता खोला गया है उनके हाथों, इसीलिए खुदा की तकदीर ने उनको पहले पकड़ा है।
Having declared martial law for the third time in the country's history in 1977, now it was General Ziaul Haq who was the head of the state of Pakistan. Mr. Rahman, Ziaul Haq, after his military coup, he ousted Bhutto's government. And what were the views he had about the parliament of Bhutto's? The parliament actually did declare Ahmadis non-Muslims by amending the constitution.
Farooq, it is wonderful to see how the providence and destiny works. Ahmadis were deeply hurt with the amendment, but their reaction was, if we are Muslims in the eyes of Lord, so what if the government says you are not Muslim? But the Bhutto's government, so to say the people's government, the parliamentary procedures adopted, they held out to the world, this is a parliamentary decision, has been taken in a parliamentary way. But the moment Ziaul Haq came in, the real face of the parliament was brought before the world. So now Ziaul Haq brought the real face of the people. Was it the democratic decision? The people who were sitting there, Ziaul Haq published a white paper giving out the black deeds of each and every one of those people. The lives of each one of them was not the life of a truly practicing Muslims. Simply morally depraved people in every respect, the life full of corruption. They did not know anything about religion. So they are the people who make that decision who is a Muslim, who is not. So Ziaul Haq's white paper was a slap on the face of the parliament which said we have made a parliamentary decisions. Parliaments are elected on a manifesto. These people were not elected on that manifesto, and these people who were elected on an economic manifesto, their faces were shown by Ziaul Haq to the people. These are the people who did this. He did it for his own purpose. Yeah. He wanted to legitimize his coup because these people are bad. But Providence was showing to the world that these are the people who interfered with the faith.
Absolutely. Mr. Rahman, we see that the 10 years period from 74 to 84 was rather a period of lull, if you like. What was happening in that period?
Well, it was all calm on the surface. If you can call it a lull, it was a lull. But you know, with the amendment, the Ahmadis did not feel disturbed to the extent that they felt if we are Muslims in our hearts, and if we are Muslims in the eyes of Lord, and if we are free to pray as we like, if we are free to practice our faith as we like, so what if the Lord does not recognize me as a Muslim? I will lose some of my political rights. I don't care. Yes. For the sake of my faith, I am willing to give up my political rights. That was the attitude. So Ahmadis did not react. Ahmadis did not go to the courts challenging this and doing this and doing that. So they were calm. So this reaction was again, but the mullahs, the kind of upstarts that they are, they did not sit quiet. During that period, there were 36 cases in more than 30 districts of Punjab, wherein taking cue from this ordinance, from the amendment, they said Ahmadis are no longer Muslims, so therefore they cannot pray like Muslims,
Right.
they cannot build their mosque like Muslims, they cannot face Kaaba, they cannot invoke durood on the Holy Prophet, they cannot stand, they cannot go for ruku, they cannot go for prostration.
Right.
So in fact they wanted to read into the ordinance, into the amendment, a complete denial of right of worship for Ahmadis. Ahmadis thought the amendment as such, in so many words, did not stop them from practicing their faith, and they remained content with that, losing their political rights. Mullahs went to the courts, and mullahs took these cases to the courts, and ultimately all these 36 cases were brought into the High Court and were decided in one go in the case of Abdurrahman Mubashir. Now this attitude of mullah had been foreseen by Chaudhry Muhammad Zafarullah Khan. Immediately after this amendment, Chaudhry Muhammad Zafarullah Khan Sahab wrote a book, small booklet known as Mera Deen,
Right.
My Faith. He said, my deen, my faith says Allah is one, Muhammad is the Prophet, is the Khatmun Nabiyeen, and I believe in angels, I believe in life after death, etc., 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 and I believe that Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad was the promised Messiah and the Mehdi as prophesied. So he gave the whole list of his beliefs, and he ended with saying, this is what my belief is. I am free to practice my belief, I am free to believe as I like. Whatever name to this faith is given by the Constitution. Constitution may give any name to this faith. This is my faith. He did not say I am a Muslim or I am not. This is my faith. Constitution may give it any name. So
he actually could foresee something worse coming.
He could foresee that the mullahs will not.
Right.
So mullahs brought these cases. Then we Ahmadis put up a very spirited resistance to that. And that is a long story how in the case of Abdurrahman Mubashir.
Which we'll cover later on, I think, because that effectively watered down
But in Abdurrahman
74.
Mubashir, all the plea of the mullahs were rejected outright. And in one word I can say, the High Court said, yes, Constitution says they are not Muslims, but they are not Muslims of a special kind. They have been practicing their faith for the last 100 years. And these are their religious rituals and rites. We cannot stop them. So.
Thanks very much. Now, it was General Ziaul Haq's turn to play with the religion and further take away the right to from the millions of peaceful Pakistani Ahmadis and other minorities.
I don't want to go into details. I just want that the text of this ordinance passed in April 1984, this Order 20th, be sent to any 5 jurists of the world. Now that we in this country ostensibly have a free judiciary with wonderful relations with the international jurist community, send the text of this ordinance to any 5 jurists outside Pakistan and seek their opinion. And then we come to know what this anti-Ahmadiyya ordinance is about. Or if they don't want that, I can give 5 names from Pakistan, eminent jurists, lawyers, and they'll tell them what this law is about. It's a piece of trash, but it has destroyed Pakistan, and it will continue to do so because we do not have the guts to repeal this law. We are not even able to redefine or amend a law made by Assembly in 1990. I am referring to 295C. If we cannot even amend a law made by Assembly, how can we repeal an ordinance promulgated in 1984?
In April of 1984, General Muhammad Ziaul Haq promulgated the notorious Ordinance 20, also known as Anti-Islamic Activities of the Qadiani Group, Lahori Group and Ahmadis Ordinance of 1984. According to this new law, Ahmadi Muslims were effectively barred from referring to themselves as Muslims, using Islamic greetings and following various practices essential for all Muslims to follow. This law was a vile attempt to usurp the fundamental human right of Ahmadis to practice their faith. General Zia's primary target was the institution of Khalifatul-e-Ahmadiyya, the divinely guided leadership of the Jamaat.
The moment I was selected by Allah to lead the Jamaat, Zia did not like this perspective at all. The regime of Zia wanted some political philosophy to support their regime politically and to give them a reason, a justification for remaining in power. So what they said was, they said they are the custodians of Islam. As such, they have to serve certain purposes for the sake of Islam. And as long as those purposes are not served and achieved, they would remain in power. You know, as if they were commissioned by God to do that. So for this, they had to align and implicate mullahs and to utilize and exploit them. And what was the purpose for which they were destined to play a very important role, you know? The purpose was to destroy the foremost enemy of Islam, that is Ahmadiyya community.
The law categorically prohibits Ahmadis from using the term Amir al-Mu'mineen for the Imam of their Jamaat. These and many other day-to-day Islamic activities, like saying adhan or greeting others with Assalamu alaikum or even offering salat, become crimes punishable by up to 3 years imprisonment. Since the imposition of these laws, it also became illegal for Ahmadis to preach their beliefs or even defend themselves against vile mullah propaganda through books or periodicals. Several hundred Ahmadis have been booked under these laws to date, and many more are being harassed and intimidated by their opponents on a daily basis.
Mr. Rahman, what was the immediate background to General Ziaul Haq's Ordinance 20?
You see, Ziaul Haq had imposed martial law. That was in 1977. And 7 years had passed. And he was losing all legitimacy. He was gasping for legitimacy. Right. So for that, he enlisted the support of the mullahs. And the mullahs were all the time, they had miserably failed in stopping the Ahmadis from practicing their faith as Islam. So mullahs conspired with Ziaul Haq, or Ziaul Haq conspired with mullahs, and he brought Ordinance 20 of 1984, prohibiting all those things which the High Court had in so many words allowed to the Ahmadis because it is a part of their faith. The ordinance said Ahmadis cannot call azan, Ahmadis cannot, they cannot use certain epithets, they cannot call themselves as Muslim. Now the Constitution does not say the Ahmadis cannot call themselves as Muslim. Constitution says we will not treat them as a Muslim, but did not stop us. Now Ordinance 20 says Ahmadis shall not pose to be Muslims. Right. So that kind of thing. So Ziaul Haq's Ordinance 20 starts with a preface. The opening words are, notwithstanding any judgment of the court or anything for the time being in force, this ordinance shall. So this ordinance was meant to nullify the High Court's judgment. That High Court's judgment was such a powerful decision, running into a few hundred pages.
You mean Abdurrahman
Mubashir case, where the High Court had allowed all those practices to us, and it was a division bench, Justice Aftab, Sheikh Aftab and Justice Samdani. So judgment was so powerful, judgment tracing the history of Indo-Pakistan civil laws and practices and fundamental rights, that they did not dare to go in appeal.
Right.
So since they did not go into appeal, they thought Supreme Court might decide the same way, so they approached the martial law administrator. We can't win in the courts. We can't fight the battle on the grounds of law. We cannot meet the reason with reason. We want your martial law force to do this. So he imposed that law.
So for a layman, how would you explain very briefly what Ordinance 20 was and what was its significance?
The Ordinance 20 actually made a day-to-day life of every Ahmadi a crime. Ahmadis have lived for the last 100 years as Muslims. They are brought up as Muslims. The day they are born, their parents call azan in their ears and Iqamat in the other ear. And they start their lives with reciting the word of Kalama Tayyab and reciting Quran. So their day-to-day behavior is conditioned. They spontaneously behave like, for instance, they would spontaneously, when they meet somebody, they say, Assalamu alaikum. Now, The ordinance said you cannot behave like a Muslim. When you say Assalamu alaikum, you're supposed to be a Muslim. And a gentleman was actually put behind bars for 3 years because he said Assalamu alaikum to somebody, and the man complained that he is supposed to be Muslim.
Just a quick question. So what if a Christian says Assalamu alaikum? Would it make a difference?
I don't know, it wouldn't make a difference to them, but the Christians or Hindus would not say, because it is not their natural reaction. They would say adab, they would say namaste, Hindus would say namaste, or Christians would say abad, or they would say good morning, or whatever they like. But in Pakistani society, even Christians can say Assalamu alaikum,
Yes.
but it is not an offense for them.
That's right.
Because by saying they are not posing to be Muslim, they remain to be Christians as they are.
Very inconsistent.
And then
piece of law.
people were, I remember, I could go on counting cases ad infinitum, interesting cases, when a man in Ahmedabad was charged because on the Pakistan television, which he was playing inside his house, Quran was being recited, and he was charged because Quran is being recited in his house by the Pakistan television.
Absolutely ludicrous.
I had to go to Peshawar.
Unbelievable stuff.
So a man was put behind the jail because he applied for leave from his department, that I am going to for itikaf in the last 10 days of Ramadan. Oh, itikaf? You're supposed to be a Muslim.
So that was big enough a reason for him to be imprisoned for 3 years. Okay, just a very quick question then. So was Ordinance 20 ever challenged by the Ahmadis? If it was, what was the outcome?
Ordinance 20 was challenged in more than one ways. The Ahmadiyya history has been that we do not ordinarily, because we believe that no worldly authority can interfere or change our faith. So therefore, perhaps we did not challenge the amendment, because we were free to practice our faith. But when it came to Ordinance 2020, then it was directly had bearing on our practices. And people were being sent to jail for writing kalima, sent to jail for saying Assalamu alaikum. So when they were being sent to jail, they were being brought to the courts. And when they were brought to the courts, the issues came up. So ultimately, there were many appeals which reached the Supreme Court. And there the question whether the ordinance is constitutionally valid or not, that came under challenge. That is Zahiruddin case.
Which we'll discuss in details a little bit later on.
And also, some individual lawyers, this humble man being one of them, challenged the Ordinance 20 in the Sharia court also. Because Ziaul Haq had brought in the Sharia
Must have
law.
been a very bold step to go to Sharia law.
Yeah, because we thought, who can beat us in Sharia? We are the people who follow Sharia. And Ziaul Haq says law should be in accordance with Sharia.
But they had a man-made Sharia law.
No, they said we don't bother about Sharia, we bother about Constitution. But that is long.
Okay, yeah.
But in both cases, we failed. But in both cases, Sharia court did not say the ordinance is not against Quran and Sunnah.
Okay.
They said the ordinance is the result of the constitutional fiat. So we failed, with the result that domestic avenues stand closed for us on this issue.
Yeah, okay. It was General Ziaul Haq's ordinance in 1984 that caused the migration of the divinely guided caliphate out of Pakistan. Hazrat Mirza Tahir Ahmed was a prominent member of the delegation of the National Assembly in 1974. Now, he became the fourth successor of the Prophet Messiah in 1982. Within 2 years of his ascension to the office of caliphate, General Ziaul Haq left no choice but for Hazrat Mirza Tahir Ahmed to bid farewell to his homeland for good.
I suspected that something is cooking against Ahmadiyyat between the Mullah and the then dictator of Pakistan, Ziaul Haq. Instead of running away, I went straight to Islamabad and camped there for 7 days until the Deputy Commissioner of Islamabad sent me a very urgent message. This Deputy Commissioner said, my earnest advice to you is, for God's sake, return immediately to Rabwa, or it will be too late. I immediately called a meeting of all the Ahmadi elders, whoever were available at the time, to reach Rabwa immediately. I stated before them the facts, the consequences of this ordinance. I told them that according to this ordinance, if I remain in Pakistan and declare myself to be a Muslim, immediately they would arrest me and put me behind the bar. So how can I remain a Khalifa of Jamaatul Ahmadiyya, Khalifatul Masih, and operative at the same time? It was decided that I would leave on Sunday morning by car, and then we reached at about 10:30, reached Karachi. And after eating food and just a little rest, we left for the airport because the plane, I remember, left at 12:30. Now, they told me to come late. Said there's no need for you to come early. They said exactly 5 minutes from the time of the departure of the plane, we will send our special car. The order that our head of the Ahmadiyya community is not permitted to leave the country from any borders was signed by Zia himself. Ziaul Haq lived most of his time during the time of Hadhrat Khalifatul Masih Salis, the third caliph. So what he dictated was, and this is written on that prohibition letter, that Mirza Nasir Ahmed, the fourth head of the Ahmadiyya community, for that, is not permitted to leave the country from any borders. They had a dilemma. They could not stop Mirza Tahir Ahmed from going on. And they did not know much intricacies about the fourth and third caliphate, So they must have started ringing the intelligence chief of the intelligence bureau in Islamabad and trying to get clearance from him or instructions that this is the case. That is why this was delayed. So at 1:30, we left. The plane, of course, went to Geneva and from there on to Holland. And there we had to wait for a while. Then we came to London.
Around midday, Huzur arrived at Heathrow Airport. And by the grace of Allah, we had made all the arrangements, no problem, no difficulty. And the staff of the KLM, on which the airline on which Huzur travelled, they were also available to receive Huzur.
Mr. Rahman, how significant was General Ziaul Haq's period in Pakistan's history in fueling the fire of hatred that was triggered in 1974 against Ahmadis?
Mahmud, Ziaul Haq's period was a turning point for the worse. It was a watershed because he virtually legitimized the interference of state into religion. And he therefore provided sanctity to the extremist elements within the Pakistan polity and the mullahs and the extremists who wanted to enforce the their jihadi concept and the Sharia of their own version. They were given a legitimacy. And this ultimately turned the entire Pakistan society. The Pakistan society now cannot. So it was very significant, not only from the point of view of Pakistan, but from the point of view of the change of the politics of the region. It was a very significant move towards extremism, move away from democracy, move away from the liberal democratic institutions, move towards the extremist, fundamentalist, obscurantist versions of Islam, which put the country on a slippery slope.
So can we say in this period the foundations were being laid for the global extremism, perhaps?
Yes, certainly, most certainly. Because global extremism now is the direct outcome of those philosophies which these Al-Qaeda and Mullah Umar's people, and in Pakistan Taliban, they also talk of, they talk of the Islamic system, Islamic law, and they talk of the takfir, and they talk of the apostatization of Muslims who do not enforce the Sharia according to their version. So they have to be killed. So this has a global impact. Pakistan, it is no longer restricted to Pakistan. It has been exported from Pakistan to Indonesia. It has been exported to Bangladesh. It has its effects throughout the Western world. The people who are doing all those kinds of things.
And Central Asia as well.
And Central Asia as well.
So how did General Ziaul Haq's 11 years extremist regime come to an end?
ان کا انجام بھی لازماً بد ہوگا، اس میں تو وہم کا سوال ہی کوئی نہیں. آج تک خدا تعالیٰ کی تقدیر نے کسی ظالم احمدیت کے دشمن کو چھوڑا نہیں ہے، ہمیشہ بد انجام کر کے چھوڑا. مگر کب ہوگا یہ اللہ بہتر جانتا ہے. بعض لوگوں کا خیال ہے کہ جو 8 والا الہام ہے کہ 8 میں داخل 8 سے پہلے یموت و قبل الثمانیہ 8 سے پہلے مر جائے گا. اس کے متعلق مختلف احمدی دوست اندازے لگا رہے ہیں، اور بعضوں کا خیال یہ ہے کہ یعنی فلاں تاریخ سے شروع کیا جائے تو 8 اب یہ اس میں بنیں گے، 87 میں بنیں گے. مگر جب یہ پیشگوئی ظاہر ہوگی اس وقت پتہ چلے گا کہ وہ لگتی ہے کہ نہیں. عموماً جو مجھے لوگ خط لکھ رہے ہیں ان میں 2 پیشگوئیوں کو اکٹھا کر رہے ہیں. بعد 11 انشاءاللہ ایک ہے، اور ایک یہ ہے کہ یموت و قبل الثمانیہ. وہ ثمانیہ کب شروع ہوں گے، کب سے شروع ہوتے ہیں، یہ مختلف آراء الگ الگ ہیں. لیکن ایک یہ بھی ہو سکتا ہے کہ 8 کا یہ 9 پر بڑا زور دیتے ہیں یہ صاحب، اور 90 بھی پورا کرنا چاہتے ہیں. اب یہ عجیب بات ہے کہ یہ 90 کا مسئلہ وہی ہے جو زنجیر بھٹو صاحب نے بنائی تھی، اور انہوں نے وہ ختم بھی ہو چکی، پھر بے وجہ اس زنجیر کو دوبارہ پکڑ لیا اور 90 کی زنجیر پھر اپنے لیے کریٹ کر چکے ہیں. پہلے کہتے تھے 9 سال ہے نا، 9 ماہ، اور پھر سن 90 سے پہلے 9 سال ہو گئے، اور اب 90 سے پہلے میں نہیں جاؤں گا. اب 90 کا لفظ بھی آ گیا، 9 کا لفظ بھی آ گیا. 88 میں 99 میں ان کے 90 پورے ہوتے ہیں 89 میں، اور 90 آتا ہے نا بعد میں، پھر تو 89 میں 9 پورے ہوتے ہیں. اگر 8 سے مراد یہ ہو کہ 9 نہیں لگے گا اور 8 میں پکڑا جائے گا تو یہ 57 کا اینڈ یا 9 کا شروع، 88 کا شروع یا 87 کا اینڈ، یہ بنتا ہے. کہ 8 نہیں لگیں گے اس کو، یہ تو 9 کہہ رہے ہیں نا. تو اگر یہ ابھی تک یہ پیشگوئیوں کے متعلق جب تک وہ پوری نہ ہو جائیں اس وقت تک واضح طور پر نہیں کہا جا سکتا. لیکن چونکہ احمدیوں کو تکلیف بڑی پہنچی ہے اس لیے وہ ڈھونڈتے رہتے ہیں کوئی نہ کوئی الہام. لیکن جب لگ جاتا ہے تو پھر اس کے شواہد اتنے اکٹھے ہو جاتے ہیں کہ پھر جو نہ ماننے والا ہو اس کو بھی دکھائی دینے لگ جاتا ہے. مثلا بھٹو صاحب کو والا الہام جب تک بن نہیں گیا، شکل میں ظاہر نہیں ہو گیا، اس وقت تک یہ دلائل کسی کو پتہ نہیں تھے کہ جو غیر کو بھی مطمئن کر سکیں. اب ہم جب بیک لائٹ میں دیکھتے ہیں مڑ کے تو سب کچھ صاف نظر آنا شروع ہو جاتا ہے. تو ان کی تقدیر گندی ضرور ہے، یہ میں آپ کو بتاتا ہوں. ضروری نہیں کہ اس الہام سے مارے جائیں، اور خدا تعالیٰ جب پورا کرے گا تو دکھا بھی دے گا کہ یہ اس طرح پکڑا گیا ہے. بچتے تو نہیں ہیں، مگر بعض لوگ بے صبری کر رہے ہیں، کہتے ہیں ذرا فوراً دکھاؤ. اللہ رحم کرے. میں تو کہتا ہوں کہ مجھے ڈر صرف یہ نہیں کہ یہ پکڑے جائیں گے، مجھے ڈر یہ ہے کہ یہ قوم کو نہ ساتھ لے بیٹھے. جو اصل خطرہ ہے وہ یہ ہے، وہی یہی مراد ہے. خطرہ یہ ہے کہ یہ تاخیر سے یہ خطرہ نظر آ رہا ہے. جب خدا تاخیر کرتا ہے پکڑنے میں تو اس کی سزا بڑھ جاتی ہے، اور وہ سارے مجرم شامل کر لیتا ہے جو مؤید ہو رہے ہوتے ہیں. اس لیے مجھے تو خطرہ ملک کا پڑا ہوا ہے اور قوم کا پڑا ہوا ہے. آپ کو جلدی یہ بھٹو اس کو منوانے کی یہ بالکل معمولی بات ہے، چھوٹا خیال ہے نسبتاً.
آج بھی دیکھنا مرد حق کی
حکومت کا جہاں تک تعلق ہے وہ معصوم احمدیوں پر قانونی حربے استعمال کر کے طرح طرح کے ستم ڈھا رہی ہے. اور آپ کو یاد ہوگا کہ میں نے آغاز ہی میں حکومت کو یہ متنبہ کیا تھا کہ آپ اگر اپنی شان کے خلاف بھی سمجھتے ہوں چیلنج کو قبول کرنا، اگر آپ زیادتیوں سے باز نہ آئے اور ظلم و ستم کی یہ راہ نہ چھوڑی تو جہاں تک میں سمجھتا ہوں خدا کی تقدیر اسے مباہلے کے چیلنج قبول کرنے کے مترادف بنائے گی اور آپ سزا سے بچ نہیں سکیں گے. اس کا مطلب یہ ہے کہ جس قوم کو ہم مخاطب کر رہے ہیں آج، جس کو ہم نے مباہلے کی دعوت دی ہے، بدقسمتی سے ان کے مقدر میں خدا تعالیٰ کی ناراضگی کا دن دیکھنا ہے. ورنہ اللہ تعالیٰ اس رنگ میں مجھے یہ پیغام نہ دیتا کہ ہسٹری ریپیٹس اٹ سیلف، اس میں کوئی تبدیلی نہیں دیکھو گے، مجرموں کو خدا ضرور سزا دے گا. جماعت احمدیہ تو خدا تعالیٰ کے فضل سے ایک والی رکھتی ہے، ایک ولی رکھتی ہے. جماعت احمدیہ کا ایک مولا ہے، اور زمین و آسمان کا خدا ہمارا مولا ہے. لیکن میں تمہیں بتاتا ہوں کہ تمہارا کوئی مولا نہیں. خدا کی قسم، جب ہمارا مولا ہماری مدد کو آئے گا تو کوئی تمہاری مدد نہیں کر سکے گا. خدا کی تقدیر جب تمہیں ٹکڑے ٹکڑے کرے گی تو تمہارے نام و نشان مٹا دیے جائیں گے، اور ہمیشہ دنیا تمہیں ذلت اور رسوائی کے ساتھ یاد کرے گی.
On the 17th of August 1988, only 5 days after the final ultimatum was given to him by Hadhrat Khalifatul Masih IV, General Ziaul Haq died in a plane crash. The plane was packed with the top military elite of Pakistan, who also perished with their leader, a leader who had invited the wrath of God upon himself by refusing to mend his ways.
We'll leave you with this question today. Why did Zulfiqar Bhutto, King Faisal, General Zia and several others like them met the end themselves which they had planned for the Ahmadiyya Muslim community? On the other hand, why the apparently weak and defenseless Ahmadiyya Muslim community is living and prospering? This is all we have time for today. Our next episode will be the last in the series, 1974, From Democracy to Extremism. Please join us again. Assalamu alaikum.
دو گھڑی صبر سے کام لو ساتھیو، آفت ظلمت و جور ٹل جائے گی. آہ مومن سے ٹکرا کے طوفان کا رخ پلٹ جائے گا، رت بدل جائے گی.